Well, good morning Year 10 and welcome to this third video. It's the second topic that we're looking at here, structure and narrative. We've looked at the themes of science and religion and secrecy and reputation already, and now we're going to think about structure and narrative. It's different to themes. It's not really the ideas that are in this book, it's more the way that this story is told, the order that things happen in, the chronology of events. And so in this video today we're going to find out a little bit more about how Stevenson sort of manipulates structure and narrative to interest the reader. So let's get into it. Firstly then, a little problem for you. What do you get when you cross a shush face with a top hat and an onion? Well, by the end of this video, it'll be your job to write me an email and tell me exactly what these three things mean and how they combine to form intrigue in this novel. Firstly then, the narrative is very limited. What do I mean by that? Well, we have a narrator, but the narrator doesn't tell us everything that happens at the start. That would be boring. That would be completely pointless. We wouldn't be on edge, there would be no tension, and the suspense would be very much limited. Whereas, as it is, we follow Utterson. Although he's not the narrator telling the story, we follow him in the third person, finding out information as he finds it out. And he finds things out gradually. So the first thing then, if you're making notes in your book, is to note down this quotation here. This is found at the end of chapter 8, and accompany it with the note that this builds tension as we are finding things out gradually, and if Utterson, a sort of very formal, learned, clever lawyer, can't piece these things of evidence together, then this is obviously creating suspense and tension for us as well, because we only find things out when he finds things out. Secondly then, Utterson has this tendency to jump to the wrong conclusions as he's talking with Poole. Poole is, just before they smash down the red baize door to the cabinet in chapter 8, Poole is sort of listing all the different pieces of evidence, and Utterson is one by one trying to disprove what Poole is saying. He's saying, well, you know, maybe Jekyll just had this sort of illness that caused his voice to change. Maybe that's why you heard the wrong voice. And he has this tendency to jump to the wrong conclusions at various points in the novel. At one time, he thinks that Jekyll is being blackmailed by Hyde. He sort of thinks, I fear blackmail. Is that what he says? And then another time as well, he decides that Jekyll must be forging for Hyde. He thinks that he must be protecting Hyde. Jekyll forged for a murderer. And then I think he says, and my blood ran cold in my veins, or his blood ran cold in his veins. And lastly, he only finds the truth out at the very end of the novel, in the form of the two narratives that he picks up and reads in his study to himself privately, which is chapter 9, Dr. Lanyon's narrative, and chapter 10, the enormous chapter, Henry Jekyll's false statement of the case. And actually, we never really hear what his reaction to these two things is. We could make a kind of quite a morbid guess that just like Lanyon, when he finds out the truth, he dies. Maybe Stevenson is sort of hinting that Utterson is lost for words. Maybe even he's died as a result of the shock of this. That's not in the novel. But the fact that it ends with Henry Jekyll's false statement of the case, and we never get to hear Utterson's reaction, is a really interesting point of discussion there. Why is Utterson silenced? Why does he not have a separate chapter where he reflects and tells us what he's learnt, tells us what he thinks now, tells us that he's sad that Henry Jekyll is gone? There's none of that, and that's a very interesting point of comment at the end there. Maybe it's to do with this idea of the bargain that he's made with Enfield, never to speak of this again. Now, firstly, it's really important that Utterson is a credible narrator. It's important that we have a lot of trust in him as narrator. Although the narration is limited, we still believe him. We still believe his point of view. And how is this achieved? Well, he's a credible character. He's a professional man. He's got a professional qualification, making him a lawyer. He's also quite tolerant of other people. He says that he's got an approved tolerance of others. That's what the narrator describes him as in the first chapter. And this is good because it means that he's not going to judge Jekyll. He's not going to have this sort of overly moralistic sense that Jekyll is bad, that he's a sinful character. He's quite tolerant of others, and this is why we want to trust his judgment on things. And maybe this is why Jekyll has chosen Utterson as the person to find out this full statement of the case at the end, because he knows he's not going to be judged too badly. And he's an unbiased person. He tries to search for the truth without letting his personal feelings get involved. So the main narrative is in chronological order, and this is from Utterson's perspective, as we've already thought. This gives a sense of time passing and builds tension, because we're still left with unanswered questions at the end. We find things out when Utterson finds things out. And this recreates realism for us, because it's almost reflecting how life is passing for Utterson as he's finding out these pieces of information. It also adds an air of authenticity. If Utterson is a lawyer compiling evidence in a case, this is this narrative perspective, to have the first 8 chapters happen in chronological order, builds that experience for us as well. We find out this, then this, then this, and it all kind of accumulates together to add this authenticity to the case, as we think about the title, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 all happen in chronological order, as we've already thought. But at the end of chapter 8, we're left with a lot of questions. Well, we leave Hyde lying dead on the floor of Jekyll's cabinet, and Poole and Utterson standing over him, and they're asking themselves questions. They can kind of piece together a few things, but the whole story has still got lots of holes in it. And a Victorian audience, obviously it's worth saying, wouldn't know the big twist at the end that Jekyll and Hyde are the same person. But obviously we know this, but we have to kind of suspend belief a little bit and pretend that we're having that experience when we're thinking about structure and narrative. The final 2 chapters do not flow in a linear narrative. Instead, they return to explain previous events and fill the gaps. So chapter 9, Dr. Lanyon's narrative, fills in the gaps from chapters 6, 7 and 8. And then chapter 10, Jekyll's full statement of the case, serves to fill in every single gap that we've ever thought of. It goes back in immense detail, back to chapter 1, even before the start of the book really. It talks about how he grew up and the different feelings that he tried to oppress over his lifetime. And by leaving these gaps and then filling them in with explanations at the end, Stevenson ensures that suspense is maintained throughout. Embedded narratives. So what does that mean? This is a posh way of saying a story within the main narrative, and there are a few embedded narratives that happen in this text. It's worth saying that it makes the story more authentic, sort of like if we're thinking about this as being a case, as the title would suggest, then these are the sort of little bits and pieces of narratives, of documents that Enfield includes in his case as he's building up a picture of what's happening. The first one is Lanyon's letter, sorry. We've got Jekyll's statement of the case, and then we've got some eyewitness accounts as well. Enfield's testimony at the start of chapter 1, where he talks about the trampling of the poor girl, and we've got the maid's testimony as well. Watching the murder of Sir Danvers from the window means that it's not just one person's view of events. There's 2 ideas here that collaborate. A really interesting point here, just to wander off the topic for a moment. I can't remember who it was in their essay that mentioned this, but the idea that a lot of these things are seen through the frame of something. I can't remember who said this, but it was like the maid sees this murder through a window. Jekyll sees Utterson and Enfield through a window. Hyde appears in the frame of a doorway. It's quite a modern view, but it's quite a good one actually. It's quite consistent throughout the whole novel that doors and windows somehow frame They don't just conceal things, but they also frame how people see things as well, which is a really decent point that warrants further investigation, I would say, that I haven't had a chance to think about yet. But they all coincide to form this overall picture. It's like pieces of evidence in the case. So looking at the full title of the novel, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, even though parts of the story seem impossible, by securing all the evidence through the various embedded narratives, Stevenson adds authenticity to his novella, making it even more frightening. So we find that there are some discovered documents as well as embedded narratives in the text. During the narrative, Utterson discovers documents. The first one is Jekyll's will. This is the starting point for Utterson's hunt for Hyde, and as a legal document, it not only ensures that he has to take it seriously, but it provides a direct link between Jekyll and Hyde. We only learn of this document after Enfield's eyewitness account of the trampling of the child and Hyde's shady disappearance and reappearing into the sordid door, which raises the question, why would Jekyll want to associate with this character, let alone leave all his money to him? The second discovered document is Carew's letter. Now, when he's murdered, Danvers Carew is carrying a letter to Utterson, but we never find out what it's about. It only suggests that Carew is Utterson's client. You could have lots of different perspectives on this. Is it that Carew is being blackmailed? We thought about the links that his character sets up with homosexuality, and Utterson is quite well aware of the prospect of blackmail being central to gentlemen when they feel like their reputation is under attack. So it could be something like that, but we're never told what is in that envelope. The third document that's discovered is the letter that Hyde supposedly wrote to Jekyll after Carew's murder. So a letter from Hyde to Jekyll. Think about it, because this could be another moment in the novel where there is this false sense of ending. Just like in your essay, in the extract from chapter 7, there is a false sense that things are drawing to a close, that things are being concluded. The gentlemen agree, oh, it's isn't it good that, you know, we don't have to think about Hyde anymore, it's nice that this nasty business has been taken care of. But then as soon as they experience Jekyll having a change of face, thrusting down the window and being instantly withdrawn into the house, it sets them into this fit, this fear. Their blood run cold. And at first, it's the same with this letter. At first, Utterson finds it quite reassuring. It proves to him that Hyde isn't blackmailing Jekyll. But then his fears are renewed, because Paul actually says this letter wasn't sent by post, and it wasn't even delivered by hand to this house. And it gets Utterson thinking, well, how did this letter come to be in Jekyll's hand? If it wasn't delivered, if it wasn't posted, how has Jekyll got this letter? And that's why he is forced to take it to his clerk, Guest. When Guest examines the letter, as you can remember, he detects it's the same handwriting, just sloping different ways. Remember the amazing symbolism of Jekyll and Hyde here? The same person but leaning different ways. This relief Utterson first felt when reading the letter turns to dread as he is forced to conclude that Jekyll has forged for a murderer. Again, these discoveries and the documents add intrigue and reliability, adding to the jigsaw of events Utterson is compiling. They offer small hints, but not the full picture. Hyde is a very significant character in this novel, but we never get to hear from him directly. We never have a chapter that's called Edward Hyde's full statement, for example. And this is important because Hyde is always a character that we have to see through the lens of other characters. He's a character that we never get to hear from directly. So why don't we get to hear from him directly? In the final chapter, Jekyll is writing his narrative, but is in fear constantly of being overtaken at any moment by Hyde, who will tear it to pieces. Hyde is excluded from the narrative, and I want you to think about this as being symbolic, not just that Stevenson was lazy and couldn't be bothered to put a chapter 11 in. He's excluded from the narrative, just like he is excluded from society. In general, as we see, characters who are on the outskirts of society, characters who are marginalised, characters who are outsiders in many ways, don't usually in books get to tell their story, and it happens here. I want you to see that narrative choice as a symbolic move by Stevenson, creating the idea of further distancing him from the reader. Yes, to add mystery, but also to emphasise this fact that he is excluded from society, just like he's excluded from the narrative. He never gets a chance to tell things from his perspective, making him more mysterious for the reader, and perhaps Stevenson knew this would make him, as a writer, seem like he was more in support for Henry Jekyll. So he's thinking here about maybe as a writer, he doesn't really want to seem like he is in support of Hyde, who's a sort of deranged murderer, psychopath character. If anything, though, it provides evidence for this split personality, this separateness, but eventually, by making them separate, it eventually results in Jekyll's death. So I'll go back to this original puzzle that I left you with at the start of this video. Hopefully you haven't just been thinking about this, hopefully you've been listening to the evidence as we piece it together along the way. What does this motif of silence and Victorian obsession with reputation and the embedded layered narratives result in? Well, the letters to Utterson form a great part of this piecing together of evidence. Think about the letter from Lanyon to Utterson, and then that final letter on Jekyll's desk found by Poole and Utterson in chapter 8. Both these letters have stipulations about when they should be opened, and sometimes they are even wrapped up in other letters and notes and envelopes, this creating a layered effect, like an onion, adding to the secrecy and suspense. Both gentlemen would rather write down their experiences than speak personally to Utterson about them. This could perhaps link to the earlier motif of silence with the contextual information about reputation in Victorian times, and this technique of an embedded narrative. See how these three things work together for a combined purpose. What do you think this combined purpose is? Does it work? Would it be even more secret if they didn't write down their ideas? Would it be more secret if they had a conversation with Utterson rather than to write down and to keep this kind of written proof of correspondence between them? Interesting that they have these stipulations to be opened after I've died, because when they've died, really, their reputation falling into disrepute, it can't really hurt them. So it's this idea that they don't mind their secrets being out as long as they're dead and gone when it happens. So, could you suggest something symbolic in the book that draws these ideas together? Put your answers in an email. It doesn't have to be a massive essay, though you can if you wish, but it should be roughly one paragraph with some developed ideas referring to the techniques and a suggestion of what the combined effect of these things could be. And I will put this task on the frog page of our lesson today, just so that you've got a written record of what this is that I'm asking you to do. So finally, just to recap, we've looked at themes, we've looked at science and religion, we've looked at secrecy and reputation, and we've looked at structure and narrative. Stay tuned for the next session, which will be on setting and symbolism. Thank you.